So, MOZA just released the public beta for what they're calling the cutting-edge 3.0 force feedback update for the R12 wheelbase. And because of that, we brought our own R12 back into the warehouse. Because like probably most of you, we want to find out how big of a difference it makes and how this now $500 wheelbase stacks up against more expensive options on the market. So, we have some pretty high expectations for MOZA this time around, and yeah, the boss man just walked in with the R12, so it's time to get it on the rig and start the testing. So, the first thing to go over in this comparison is what the R12 is like before installing the update. The exterior build quality is not going to change with a software update, unless it makes the wheelbase explode, but I do still think it's worth mentioning that it's a pretty nice looking piece of hardware. There's very little plastic going on here, and the aluminum casing has a sleek and stylish design. You could even say it's a pretty photogenic wheelbase. Now when it comes to the driving side of things, pre-update, the R12 is honestly already pretty good. The 12 Nm of force feedback feels decently strong, and you are getting a pretty substantial amount of information back from it. That being said, there are some things we'd like to see improved. Sometimes the force feedback feels unnaturally sharp, like, let's say you drive over a curb. The feedback is definitely there, but it can feel very digital, more like computer physics than real life. Or let's say you're making a hard turn. The wheel's return to center feels too quick, which leads to an artificially jerky experience. And finally, there's the really freaky one, the oscillation issue. So if you take your hands off the wheel on a straightaway, it kind of looks like the steering wheel is possessed. And MOZA says they improved this, so we really hope to see this get fixed. Alright, so now it's time to talk about the results. And here's where things get pretty interesting. So we went into the testing having heard some pretty positive things from other testers and YouTube videos. And when we first fired it up on Assetto Corsa Competizione, we also felt some pretty encouraging initial results. The force feedback felt noticeably more natural, and there seemed to be a small potential bump in detail, like maybe feeling just a bit more of the suspension in tight corners. But it was getting late, and we weren't sure how much of what we felt was placebo, so we called it a night and came back for more testing the next day. And that is when we started cycling back and forth between the new and old firmware versions. So we tested 3 different games, Assetto Corsa Competizione, and iRacing. And the more we tested, the less of a difference there seemed to be. Now, let's go over the good news first. The improvement in naturalism was definitely still there, and it's the biggest improvement we've experienced overall. It's not a night and day difference, but it does feel like a more mature and finely tuned implementation. So the response you would expect to feel from an event in real life is delivered with a much less digital signature. And that's kind of where the good ends, at least in our experience. We actually aren't feeling that much more detail in any of the games, which maybe means there's a hardware limitation at play. Because, like we said, the quality of the existing details is noticeably better, but there aren't really more total details. If we really try to look for them, maybe there are some faint glimmers, but we really can't tell if that's just due to placebo effect. What isn't placebo effect is upgrading your rig with accessories from SimSportGadget. Whatever ecosystem you're running on, or whatever peripherals you're using, we have an upgrade or mount for you. Use the editor's affiliate link in the description box down below to take 5% off your entire order today. Alright, so coming back to the testing, we realized we had an issue. When we consider the experience other people seem to be having, the reviews are honestly all over the place. Some people feel no changes, and other people say it's like a completely new wheelbase. And the crux of the problem, including for us, is that the testing is not scientific. Without blind testing, more testers, and a proper setup to easily switch between firmware versions, games, and settings, it's hard to know if our experience is being affected by things like the placebo effect, tester fatigue, or even tester experience. And to top it all off, force feedback evaluations can be very personal, and there doesn't seem to exist a systematic way to compare the qualities between implementations. So as a community, I think we need to proceed with caution when discussing people's testing results. And even more than that, we need to start thinking about better ways to get this done. But with all that being said, let's discuss something that is more concretely testable, the oscillation. And unfortunately, it's not really that much better. Now, it's true, if you just let go of the wheel, it won't move, which is great until you nudge it just a bit or the car hits some kind of bump in the game. Once that happens, it's back to being crazy again. So the oscillation triggers a little less easily than before, but to us, it's far from being fixed, and we're honestly rather disappointed to see that. They did implement a hand-off protection mode too, and what this seems to be doing is it detects that the oscillation is happening, and then after a couple seconds, the motor will stop moving, which is better, but again, it's more of a band-aid than a genuine solution to a pretty unpleasant problem. So, if we bring everything back together, we can say this about the updated R12. In our testing, there is a 10 to 15% improvement in naturalism, there's little to no change in total detail, and the oscillation problem is slightly patched. For Assetto Corsa Competizione, we'd say the overall experience went from a B to an A-, and for iRacing it went from a B to a B+. Now for Assetto Corsa, we have to say that the game's native force feedback implementation already felt pretty good, but relative to itself, there still wasn't a huge change, so maybe it went from a B to a B++? And for reference, we would give the Asetek Invicta and the SimuCube 2 Pro an A+ all around. Now, oscillation is the opposite story, and there is the least improvement in Assetto Corsa. Now, you might be tempted to think that we feel like the 3.0 update is not impactful at all, but that actually isn't the case. The improved naturalism is a welcome change, and the force feedback feels smoother and less sharp. So there's that, but then there's also the price drop from $589 to $499. So if you already own the R12, great, you're getting a small quality of life update for free. On the other hand, if you're in the market for a new wheelbase, the R12 feels hard to beat at its current price. Now, if you're a force feedback connoisseur, this is probably not the right wheelbase for you. But otherwise, the quality of the current implementation should be quite satisfactory for, honestly, probably the majority of sim racers. If you're budget-oriented, MOZA might have had a little edge in value for money over the Fanatec Club Sport DD before the price drop and update, but now we would definitely just get the R12. The difference between the two wheelbases is not that huge anymore, and with $300 more in your pocket, you can make a more impactful upgrade to your rig elsewhere, whether that be better pedals or maybe a better cockpit, for instance. It could even mean the difference between a $300 GPU and a $600 GPU, which would truly be worlds apart. And finally, the MOZA pit stop software is quite good. The UI feels modern and friendly to use, and while all of these softwares have almost too many sliders, MOZA includes explanations about what each of them does, which is a very nice, beginner-friendly touch. There isn't a robust database-like preset collection like there is for the SimuCube ecosystem, but the preset system that they do have is decently easy to use. So, is the 3.0 beta firmware a magic spell that transforms the R12 into a completely new wheelbase? In our experience, no, but that's not to say that it isn't still a meaningful change. On its own, it represents a decent quality of life improvement, and with the recent price reduction, it's great value for money. But what really remains to be seen is how much of the leftover gap between MOZA and higher-end brands like Asetek and SimuCube, how much of that will have to be resolved through hardware improvements, because with discussions on force feedback, it's so easy to get tunnel visioned on one component, like the maximum torque rating or the firmware, when it's actually a very complex integration of multiple things. And yes, while the piece of the puzzle that is filled in by the game software is not under MOZA's control, it remains to be seen if future wheelbases from MOZA can feature improvements in, let's say, signal processing performance, refresh rates, motor quality, and so on. But for now, we'll leave the R12 here. It is an incredible value proposition, and with this firmware update, it reminds us that discussions about and testing of force feedback are worth a closer and a better look. The firmware is supposed to be coming to the rest of the MOZA system, and we will revisit the R12 when a final firmware release is made. But until then, like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Check out our sim racing accessories and products at SimSportGadget.com, and thank you so much for watching the video. We'll catch you in the next one.